Right, so this video is going to follow the recent trend for a lot of my videos as far as taking a concept which is commonly understood in a largely incorrect and inefficient, ineffective kind of way. And the topic of this one is obviously selfishness, as the video is implying. And I'll say from the very beginning that the color of the video quality might be total garbage because I'm filming this actually fairly late in the evening and I don't have good lighting in this room. So apologies for that, but whatever. So the subject is selfishness, and I'll say from the very beginning that really the point of understanding selfishness is actually to understand our interconnectedness and our interrelatedness. So there are some people in life who are very just, use a generic stereotypes like sort of Mother Teresa or like Amma, people who are just here to give and to love, and that's just that's who they are, that's their vibration, and that energetically works for their constitution, for their body type, for who and what they actually are. That's correct for them, and life and their system supports that. And obviously that's a very rare thing. For most of us, that's probably not going to be who we are. I can speak from personal experience. That's not me. It's not how my system works. So I point that out because these images are portrayed to us as examples of selflessness and something that we should sort of strive to. And then we obviously, in modern times, at least in Western culture, we really value the martyr, Jesus or Buddha or the Dalai Lama, or all these figures which the marketing tells us that they just were all about other people and giving themselves to other people. And it's not really true, it's not really the case, but these are a few examples of places where we get distorted ideas of what selfishness actually is. And then if we want to explore that or get into it, there's a lot of demonization that is around that. And calling someone selfish is an insult, usually. It's a very negative thing. And to say to someone, yeah, I'm a really selfish person, that's not something that a lot of us probably feel comfortable in saying, because there's a lot of negative connotations, because what people think that means is you're doing things for your own benefit at the expense and or harm or disadvantage of other people around you. Which, to be honest, that's actually not selfishness. That's actually just stupidity or manipulation or being possessed by some demonic force. That's a little bit more what that actually is. It's not actually selfishness. Because as I said at the very beginning, to understand yourself is to understand your interconnected and interrelated nature with everything else. For example, if you really get into yourself, you really get into who am I, basically who you are is dependent largely upon everything around you. And if you actually investigate yourself, you'll find that there's not a permanent, static, fixed thing. There's not a separate thing that's there that's somehow you. And our Western philosophical paradigm gives us this idea that there's like one soul. We are like this one thing, and somehow this one thing is moving through all these other things. When we actually look at reality, we can see that everything in reality is a composite, is a combination of other things. And many ancient traditions have the understanding of life as being elemental. There's obviously the Western elements, and then there's also Tibetan elements and Chinese elements, Indian elements. And just as a side note, they're all different. For example, Western elements are more states of matter, whereas the Chinese elements aren't actually elements, they're more phases or processes or ways in which energy manifests, which actually don't have much to do with like wood or actual like physical things. It's more of an energetic substance which is behind that thing. And Indian is a different thing, and Tibetan's a different thing, and Egyptian's a different thing, and lots of things have their own interpretations. So just a side note, don't assume they're all the same, because they're not. But what it's pointing to is showing us the general idea that things in life are composites or mixtures of different things. And even to use generic chemistry in a way, it's sort of showing us that the cup or whatever it is, it's a composite of composites. And then the further down we go, we see it's more composites, and it's a lot of empty space as well. So there's that sort of component. And at a very practical level, for example, I might think, oh, well, I'm a tall person. That's who I am. That defines my character, my individuality. But tall compared to what? Other people. tall in what country? If you're in China, or if you're in Africa, or you're hanging out with NBA players, then you might not be tall. You might think, oh, I'm overweight. Well, relative to what? If you're in America, overweight has a much different connotation than it does in a lot of other places in the world. You might think I'm smart, but that's only in comparison to what? You might say, well, I'm an individual because I'm creative. Okay, but you are creative with things that you didn't create, using words that you didn't invent, using all of these things which are dependent and contingent upon loads of other people from loads of other times. And everything we think we love is actually something other than us. So when we really actually start to get into, well, who am I? What am I? It always just comes back to something else, to something other, to something greater, some large web of interconnection of other people and composites, elemental forces in the universe, cosmic forces, whatever you want to call it. So just with a little bit of investigation, we can see that there's actually like this thing that I think I am, that it's just permanent, solid, separate, independent. You can't find it. I mean, don't believe me. Don't take any of this on face value. Investigate it yourself. Observe and look, and it can be quite interesting. So when we start to say, oh, well, okay, well, being selfish is bad, it's because we don't actually understand what selfishness actually is, and that selfishness and understanding selfishness and actually investigating it leads us to understanding really more of the situation that we are actually in, and more of breaking down the illusions or the crazy fictitious stories that we tell ourselves that somehow we're separate or independent or higher or lower, better or good or worse or bad or all these different things. When in reality, it always comes back to the composite. So when we talk about being self-centered, what does that mean? Well, it means centered in yourself. Because people say you can't give what you don't have. And if you are unaware of the dynamics that are playing out within your own experience, that's going to hinder the way in which you can relate to the rest of the world, because the composites, the elements, the dynamics, the forces, whatever you want to call them, the principles that make up you, that make up your internal world, that make up who and what you are also true within the external world, are also true within other people. So by becoming selfish and self-centered, you become centered within yourself. You investigate what selfishness actually means. And that takes, usually, it's not necessarily an easy or comfortable process. It's not a process which is ever really done. It's not a process which is necessarily comfortable. It's actually quite the opposite a lot of the time. But it can bear fruits. It can add a richness and a depth to our experience, because it's getting us closer to what our actual experience really is. And this is what a lot of ancient traditions have really been trying to point to, why traditions are more contemplative or reflective or investigative or analytical, not sort of trance-based, because trance and meditation, trance and contemplation, trance and reflection, these are all very different things. When we talk about meditation, people think it's just this one thing, when in actuality, you really need to understand, what does this person mean, and what context and culture does it come from, and what goals are they trying to reach, what philosophical system are they operating in, what cosmology, to actually really get in touch with what they really mean. Because if we're talking about a more ancient Eastern tradition, then it's largely a lot of what I'm talking about. And it's not something we take on blind faith, or because it's good for us, because it's going to get us something. Because it actually doesn't do that. In some ways, we gain more power and control, but we gain power and control by realizing that we didn't really have it in the first place, or that the way in which we thought we had it was actually not how we had it, and we get power and control by getting rid of it. It becomes really confusing and really paradoxical, and opens the door for a lot of nefarious, manipulative, repressive agendas, and a lot of what is marketed is just sort of like, negate yourself, get rid of yourself, be selfless, be detached, be all of these things. Which the thing is that you can't do any, you can't be non-attached. You can't be selfless. you can only really arrive at the understanding that those things are already true within our experience all the time anyways, and that our actual striving for them actually pushes them further away. And we understand through our own work, our own effort, our own investment in our own experience, these things reveal themselves in a true experiential way, which doesn't require necessary effort or upkeep, because again, it's getting us back in touch with what are the natural condition that we find ourselves in. Because if we talk about, oh, you got to be detached, and I'm just not attached to that. The majority of the time, that's just lying, because you're just attached to being non-attached. So you're just rearranging and putting it off on something else. You're rearranging the furniture on the Titanic, basically. And you don't really even understand that, well, there's no separate individual person to actually even be attached. There's no separate necessarily object to be attached to. So really what you're referring to is a fixation or a blockage or some sort of stagnation or some sort of thing that you're really just hypnotically, almost mantra-like repeating to yourself. And people talk about incantations, people talk about magic spells and casting spells and the power of mantra and all these things. And that's largely what our conditioned nature functions as, is we're constantly just going in this circle of whatever the belief or the idea or self-image is. And that is maybe a little bit more what we think about as attachment, but that's actually not attachment. It's something different. It's something which we can't, through effort, do anything about. It's something more so we can look at, reflect upon, engage with, observe, study, and then naturally it can resolve upon its own accord, become its own nature, because whatever is illusory, whatever is false, contains its own destruction within it. And even truth, the same thing. Everything in life is basically this grand recycling process. So the greatest, the highest thing still eventually becomes the lowest thing, and the lowest thing eventually becomes the highest thing, the biggest thing, the smallest thing, the whatever. It's this deep relativistic aspect of life that we can get in touch with if we actually start to investigate who and what we really are. And by becoming more selfish, more self-centered, in a way that we start to really take more responsibility for our internal world, for our psychic hygiene, for the way in which we are choosing to approach situations, the ways in which we're choosing to approach people and things, and the agendas that we're having, and the biases and the preferences and the manipulative, coercive sort of things that we're trying to do all the time. We really get in touch with these things, and then that actually leads us to many of the health practices, because many of the destructive, dysfunctional, and disharmonious behaviors that we have to do addictively are to support and enable these kind of falsehoods or illusory things, which are not necessarily evil or good or bad or right or wrong. It's just that if we investigate them, we can see that perhaps they're not even really true. And again, it's not to say that this is an easy process or a comfortable process or fast or simple or anything, because it can really vary, obviously. The paradox of the situation is, as I've been trying to come back to, is that the more we get in touch with our own nature as it is, the more we can observe it as it is and not necessarily try to coerce it or make it something preferentially, the more we can start to allow more freedom for other people, the more we can start to see other people clearly, relate to them more honestly and directly. And to me, that sounds a bit more fun, more enjoyable, more joyous, more free, more liberated, more conscious, more loving, more compassionate, all these things. But these things are contingent upon the cultivation of it within our own self. Because the idea that we are going to have this absolute freedom out here in the world it's not a thing, actually. Because there's, just by the nature of our human experience, there's limitation. And the striving for absolute transcendence of limitation is kind of demonic and parasitic. It's not a real thing, and it's not a human quality. Because through actually accepting limitation and accepting and getting in touch with the situation as it is, then we can actually start to have freedom. Because we realize the freedom that we can cultivate is an internal process of starting to be okay with things as they are, starting to see things as they are. But ironically, that is contingent upon being more selfish, having more self-worth, being more centered within ourselves instead of being other-centered or out-centered, or actually in some ways being more insane instead of out-sane. And these are all sort of paradoxical and often the opposite of what we are taught that these things are within our collective consciousness. And one of the last points that I'll make, which I find personally pretty hilarious, is the people will argue against being selfish oftentimes, and there's all this taboo around it in a way, largely because no one understands it, largely because we often live in a very fearful, traumatic state where our consciousness is consumed with what other people will think, or what will happen in the future, and all of this astral, psychological shit that is usurping and consuming our energy, our vitality. So, people will say, oh, it's really selfish of you for you to not do what I want you to do or what you think you should do. And it's like, well, wait, aren't you really selfish for wanting me to do what you want me to do? Or people say like, well, if you really loved me, you would do this. It's like, well, if you really loved me, you wouldn't ask. And that's kind of funny. And that's a really common dynamic, and it really ties into some of this coercion that I'm talking about, as far as people trying to find your guilt, trying to find your shame, trying to find these little cracks in your system to get you onto their agenda or their whatever they've constructed that they need in order to feel safe or to feel validated or to feel important or to feel big or to feel small or whatever, because we all have agendas, we all have biases, we all have preferences, we all have all these things. That's part of our human nature. And basically, most of the things that we're going to do, we're going to fuck up, we're going to mess it up, we're going to ruin it, which is just how it is. I mean, that's a kind of situation normal on planet Earth. And that's sort of partially, you could say, if we had a purpose, which we don't, but if we did have one, it might be this explorative growth, sort of evolutionary transformational process where we're all here in this big sandbox, we're all here in this big playground, and we get to sort out our issues and grow and evolve and learn about ourselves and learn about other people and learn about the world, and hopefully do that in a way that's respectful and clean and allowing other people's freedom, because freedom is a two-way street. If it's something we allow for ourselves and also allow for other people, which means both sides of it. We allow things that we don't like, but we also allow things that we like, and vice versa. So getting back to my original point is saying, oh, it's really selfish of you to, not do what I want you to do. And that's a extremely common tactic that we may use, or someone else may use on us, to try to find, like I mentioned, our guilt or shame or blame or whatever. And we, having agenda necessarily isn't bad. Like, everything I'm saying is not necessarily it's not a moralistic conversation. It's not an evaluative, good, bad, right or wrong kind of thing. Not at all, actually. Because your agenda might be to, feel good, or to be happy, or inspire people, or help people, or be creative, or do something. And that's actually, sure, that's, what you got to do, and maybe that's why you're here, maybe that's part of your gift, maybe that's part of really what helps you come alive, and you come alive, and you help other people come alive, and uplift each other. But then people can have agendas and really invest a lot of energy in feeling like a victim, or feeling like a martyr, or wanting to be abused, or wanting to be rejected. And those types of dynamics often show up more so in relationships a lot of time. That's where we get to really work out a lot of our dark, really, kind of repressed shit that we pretend like we don't actually have, but we actually do have. So part of this whole thing I'm saying about being selfish and getting in touch with that is being more selfish in the sense of getting in touch with these things that we all actually have, and then approaching it and say, well, does this work? Does this work for me? Is this producing the results that I'm interested in? Is this creating a life that I actually feel fulfilled by, and it's like it is helping me feel more connected and more related. And I will say on that note, it can often sometimes feel the opposite, and it's kind of like this paradoxical thing where I'm having this realization about myself, and I'm seeing these things about the world and my experience, but I just feel so cut off from the people around me. Like I feel more isolated. And that's part of the process of in a natural state of feeling more self-centered. But at the same time, you feel more connected. You feel more in tune with what's happening around you and what the world is doing around you, with the natural world. You start to see more patterns, more trends, and hear more things, and gather more information and more data from your experience. So you simultaneously feel more engaged, but also more isolated, but also more connected. Really odd sensation. And part of what that is getting us in touch with is the natural state of our experience, is that the majority of the time, most people are not with you. They're not present. They're not here. They're not necessarily even human most of the time, because of all of the self-denigration, self-sacrificing, self-mutilating, self-hating kind of thing that is mostly our cultural paradigm, if you want to use media and culture and lots of other things as an example. As I was saying earlier about being a martyr and like thinking if you just sacrifice yourself and give yourself over for this thing or whatever, then you're going to get a carrot or you're going to get a reward, that's going to be good. But in actuality, it's not the case, and it's a misinterpretation, misunderstanding of a tradition of information. But it actually makes us more easy to manipulate and control, which is the other example that I gave as far as you're really selfish for not doing what I want you to do. Really odd thing, really interesting manipulative strategy. And I kind of forgot what I was saying. So yeah, I just totally forgot what I was saying, and it actually worked out perfectly because my battery on my camera is at like 2% and it's about to die. So basically, roughly what I was saying is remarking upon the fact that the more self-centered and in touch we get with actually ourself and our actual center, the more we see how disconnected people actually are and how we actually are and were and all these different aspects of our experience. And that's a whole other conversation, but I'm just pointing it out because it's a part of the process. So what I'm saying is I don't recommend anything that I've just said. I don't recommend, because it's not necessarily going to be like rainbows and sunshines and butterflies. But that's it. Camera's going to die probably, and hopefully this video even works out in the first place because the lighting is garbage. But thanks for watching, and post your comments and whatnot, because this is a great topic. Share your experiences, because I get feedback from people who talk about this isolation a lot, and it's something I've related to as well. But once you actually do get more self-centered, it gives you a deeper place to connect with other people and a stronger magnetic polarity to actually connect with more like-minded people to support your own deal, and you support them. Yay, life. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.